let's get into it, guys.
There's a place near Burnwood, not far from Gentleshaw, where the ground gives way just enough to reveal something that most people would walk straight past. And what sits here is known as Nuns Well, a site that at first glance feels quiet and unremarkable, but once you look into it properly, it starts to open up into something much older and far more connected to the landscape around it. Nuns Well is recorded as a spring rising inside a chamber that has been cut directly into the rock, with the sides built up using stone blocks and the top covered with a brick arch. And although the exact date of the well itself isn't known, the structure above it is thought to be no earlier than the 15th century, and it's often placed into the 16th, which puts at least part of what we're looking at firmly into the late medieval or early post-medieval period. The chamber itself is about 3 metres in length and just over a metre in both width and height, and from that chamber water would have overflowed southwards into Redmoor Brook, tying the well directly into the natural water system that runs through this part of the landscape. But what really changes how you look at this place is where it sits, because Nuns Well is not an isolated feature. It lies within the scheduled area of Courtbanks Covert, a site that also contains the remains of a medieval moated enclosure and a bloomery, where iron was once smelted, leaving behind buried deposits of slag and cinder that are still recorded beneath the surface today. That matters because it shows that this wasn't just a quiet corner on the edge of the woods, but a place that had activity, purpose and structure to it, with water, industry and settlement all existing within the same stretch of ground. And in that context, the well starts to make a lot more sense as part of the working landscape rather than a random feature left behind. There's also a royal link suggested in the wider site, with historic England recording that the moated enclosure may possibly have been the location of a hunting lodge built by Henry II in the late 1150s. And although that connection is not proven beyond doubt, it does place this area within a network of land that was important enough to be used and managed at a high level during the medieval period. And then there's the name, because Nuns Well suggests a religious story, but from what I can find, the actual record's a bit more careful than that, stating clearly that no nunnery is known to have stood here, and that the name most likely comes from the land having been once granted by Henry II to Farewell Abbey, meaning the connection to nuns is tied to ownership, an association rather than direct occupation of the well itself. Even so, this part of the landscape does have a genuine religious context, because nearby there's thought to have been a small hermit priory, dating back to the 12th century, later associated with the Cistercian order being moved on to Stoneleigh. And while that doesn't directly link the well to that site, it does show that this was an area where religious life and land overlapped. There's also a small but telling piece of local memory attached to the water, because the water from Nuns Well was said to have been used as a cure for sore eyes. And while that doesn't prove any medicinal quality, it does place the well into a much wider pattern where natural springs were given practical and sometimes healing significance by the people who used them. By the late 19th century, Nuns Well was clearly established enough to be marked on early OS maps, including the first detailed editions from the 1880s, which tells you that this was not a forgotten or newly named place, but something recognised and fixed in the landscape at that time. What survives today is harder to interpret than it once was. Trees grew over the site and the visible features started to fade. The well's still there, but it's on its last legs. And that's what really defines Nuns Well, because when you take away the assumptions and stick to what can actually be proved, what you're left with is still enough. A rock-cut spring, shaped and built into, later arched in brick, sitting inside a medieval landscape of ironworking, water systems and land ownership tied to religious institutions. And even in its current state, partially hidden and easy to miss, it still holds onto that identity. Because places like Nuns Well don't need a single dramatic story to matter. The fact that they were named and remembered is enough to show that this ground has been part of people's lives for centuries, even if most of what happened here has long since disappeared from record.